I always butcher his name. What is it? Vivek
Ramaswamy.
He was on Glenn Beck's show, on his radio show recently, and he came in, and the topic of libertarianism came up, and he had a couple interesting things to say that I thought we would just kind of respond to.
Let's talk about it. So why did you change? You said you were a libertarian. Why did you decide you were a conservative over a libertarian?
Here's the thing. Libertarians, I got two issues. One is they're too meek, actually. So they'll talk about the free market, and they say they don't want to make political expression a civil right, as I believe we need to in this country. Yet they don't actually touch the other protected classes, like race or sex or religion or national origin. And so my view is these libertarians today, with all due respect, have their heads in the sand, because you can't have it both ways. That's problem number one. But problem number two is deeper, which is, what do we do in that free world, even when the state's out of our hair? There's still the deeper question of purpose as a citizen, how we live our lives, how we live virtuous lives. And I care about virtue in civic life and in family life and in faith-based life too. Not to say that the government necessarily should be involved or mandating those things, but those things matter for human flourishing, for American flourishing. And libertarianism has nothing to say about that. That is why I call myself a conservative today, in contrast to 15 years ago when I thought I was a cool kid in college calling myself a libertarian.
The 2 points he's made there are just so weak. That first off, he goes, libertarians don't want to make political expression a civil right, or whatever exactly you mean by that. He wasn't clear, but they don't want to touch any of these other civil rights like race or nationality or ethnicity or something like that. Wrong. We do. We don't want the government mandating any of these things. I mean, maybe you've talked to a few milquetoast libertarians who won't touch any of those more controversial issues, but that's not true. And certainly isn't true for the philosophy of libertarianism. Now, this other part that he mentions, it's not exactly wrong. It's just not in any way a criticism of libertarianism. I mean, he himself even goes, hey, look, libertarianism just has nothing to say about living like a deeply moral life. And I'm not saying that should be mandated by the government, but I care about those things. It's like, yeah, but if you're saying they shouldn't be mandated by the government, then that's the libertarian position. So if you believe the government shouldn't have any role in this, then you're a libertarian. And of course, obviously, there's lots of meaningful questions about how to live your life that libertarianism does not address. That is good. You don't want your political philosophy to address every inch of your life and how you're supposed to live your life. Conservatism doesn't have anything to say about lots of important things in life. Where conservatism doesn't tell you how to pick a wife or how to do very, very important things. But I don't think you should be looking for that out of a political program. And so if your criticism of libertarianism is that there's lots of areas in life that libertarianism on itself doesn't address, yes, that's true. And I think that's to our credit. Our belief is that people ought to be free. And that what people do with that freedom ought to be their choice. That doesn't mean us as people can't have very strong views about what you should do with your freedom. That culture and values and society, all of these things really, really do matter quite a lot. The issue is that, and I wish conservatives would ever make this connection, is that it's precisely where they have deviated and abandon flat out libertarianism that has led to the decay in our culture and our society. It is not a coincidence that our government is bigger and more intrusive and more powerful than ever before, and our culture is decayed more than ever before. That's not a coincidence. If you tell me, you show me, any conservative, show me where this cultural rot is coming from, and I will show you a tremendous amount of government involvement directly leading to that cultural rot. Pick any area, and I'll show you. Let me show you exactly how it is creating the situation that we live in today. There's this weird kind of dynamic where libertarians need to recognize some conservative values. And you can see that within the libertarian movement, it's like a problem. Stop celebrating degeneracy. It is, there's nothing noble about it. It's going to hurt your ability to persuade other people of our message, and it's going to undermine liberty itself. So libertarians almost have this cultural conservative lesson that they still need to learn, although I think a lot of us have learned a bit more about it. but it's just kind of like accepting that, like, yeah, society is going to have to be built around strong families and strong moral principles, something like that. There's like a real lesson there that libertarians have to accept. And the lessons that conservatives have to accept is that statism at every inch undermines cultural cohesion and undermines cultural morality. Every inch of it. There is not any, like Hans Hermann Hoppe does a great job writing about this, where he's like, basically his point is that by the very nature of the state, like what you're doing is you're by force taking something from one group and giving it to another. Like every inch of what the government does is that to some degree. A taxation program and a spending program. They can't do anything but that. And whatever you're taxing, you're viewing as desirable or good. And whatever you're giving to someone else, you view as being like giving them something that they needed. They have a deficiency, and so you're giving it to them, right? Like that's just the very nature of what the government is. And so just think about the economics of that. You're inherently, day one that you open up and you're a government, you are disincentivizing the good and incentivizing the bad. You're taxing the good and subsidizing the bad. So if you have less, if whatever it is, if you have less wealth, and you're saying wealth is a good thing to have, so we're going to put a tax on wealth. So we're going to disincentivize wealth. And then if you have less wealth, you get a check for it. So therefore, we're incentivizing people to have less wealth. And every inch of this, if you say you look at Social Security or something like that, you go, okay, we're going to like disincentivize you to be reliant on your community, on your family, on your own hard work, on your own like foresight for your retirement, because the government's going to take it from you anyway and give it back to you anyway. It's like every inch of the state does this. And of course, today, if you look at like every example of where the cultural degeneracy is coming from, it's all coming from government programs of one kind or another. So anyway, I wish libertarians would learn their conservative lesson and about the role of culture, and I wish conservatives would learn their libertarian lesson about the role of the state.
So you think that money is the root of all evil, said Francisco d'Anconia. Have you ever asked what is the root of money? Money is a tool of exchange, which can't exist unless there are goods produced and men able to produce them. Money is the material shape of the principle that men who wish to deal with one another must deal by trade and give value for value. Money is not the tool of the moochers who claim your product by tears, or of the looters who take it from you by force. Money is made possible only by the men who produce. Is this what you consider evil?
I know the details of why this war started. They are never mentioned in the mainstream media. I publish a magazine, the Trends Journal. We wrote about the United States overthrow the democratically elected government of Viktor Yanukovych in 2014 in detail. We wrote about the violations, breakup of the Soviet Union, when it was promised that NATO would not move 1 inch further. It was 16 out of 30. We know the details of the violation of the Minsk Agreement that Vladimir Zelensky, the current president of Ukraine, before that, played the president of Ukraine in a sitcom and also played the piano with his penis, said he had no intention of abiding by the Minsk Agreement. And instead, they killed some 14 to 15,000 Russian people in the separatist Donbass region. That was fine. So Russia says that this was a military operation to stop this, but that's never talked about. Organizing the Rebellion for Peace rally have received fierce criticism from many politicians, including Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who says the demonstration could weaken public support for Ukraine's fighting back against Russia. How about, where was Olaf Scholz and where were all of these other people that loved the war going, that did not condemn America's invasion of Iraq, that killed over 1 million people and destroyed the entire nation? that was doing very well before that. Where are all of these people coming out against the Afghan war? Brought to you by Little Lies by the murderer-in-chief George W. Bush. That's fine. America and NATO can kill all the people they want all around the world. NATO did a lovely job in Libya. America's doing a lovely job in Syria, stealing their oil, killing people. That's fine. Oh, and I forgot the Yemen war. Brought to you by Barack Obama and Anthony Blinken, America's current Secretary of State, who went to Yemen.
When you accept money in payment for your effort, you do so only on the conviction that you will exchange it for the product of the effort of others. It is not the moochers or the looters who give value to money. Not an ocean of tears nor all the guns in the world can transform those pieces of paper in your wallet into the bread you will need to survive tomorrow. Those pieces of paper, which should have been gold, are a token of honor, your claim upon the energy of the men who produce. Your wallet is your statement of hope that somewhere in the world around you there are men who will not default on that moral principle which is the root of money. Is this what you consider evil?
One final question. I would think most people, not being philosophers, don't pause to reflect about big questions like this, about what is friendship. And they might even think that it's a lot of nitpicking even to try. So why is it enriching for us philosophically to explore something like friendship that seems to come so naturally and maybe not require any extended reflection?
Well, there are several reasons. One, I think, is just that understanding is itself enriching. Just knowing more about who we are in the world is itself just on its own a good thing. But also, I think understanding more is helpful because friendship comes under challenge in a variety of ways. Something that really is deeply valuable in our lives gets challenged by social pressures, cultural attitudes, and by the ideologies that I think are sometimes in the air. And as I've suggested, for instance, right now, it seems to me there is a lot of enthusiasm for the view that people who don't embrace my ideological commitments of various sorts are not just people who differ with me, not just people I might hope would agree with me, but people who, because of their disagreement, show themselves to be morally bankrupt and worthy of condemnation. I mean, I feel like that attitude, and I don't think I'm exaggerating particularly in talking in those terms, is deeply toxic. It messes up the relationships that people have. It builds barriers. And one of the things I certainly hope to do in a book like this is to reflect on the importance of friendship and the ways in which we can kind of think our way past that sort of toxic barrier construction.
Well, the book, once again, is Understanding Friendship on the Moral, Political, and Spiritual Meaning of Love. We barely scratched the surface, but the purpose of these book conversations on the Tom Woods Show is to get you go reading the book rather than saying, I listened to that podcast episode. All my questions are answered. So you can check out this title at tomwoods.com/2289. Gary, thanks so much.
Pleasure to be here.
Have you ever looked for the root of production? Take a look at an electric generator and dare tell yourself that it was created by the muscular effort of unthinking brutes. Try to grow a seed of wheat without the knowledge left to you by men who had to discover it for the first time. Try to obtain your food by means of nothing but physical motions, and you'll learn that man's mind is the root of all the goods produced and of all the wealth that has ever existed on earth. But you say that money is made by the strong at the expense of the weak? What strength do you mean? It is not the strength of guns or muscles. Wealth is the product of man's capacity to think. Then is money made by the man who invents a motor at the expense of those who did not invent it? Is money made by the intelligent at the expense of the fools? By the able at the expense of the incompetent? By the ambitious at the expense of the lazy? Money is made before it can be looted or mooched, made by the effort of every honest man, each to the extent of his ability. An honest man is one who knows that he can't consume more than he has produced. To trade by means of money is the code of the men of goodwill. Money rests on the axiom that every man is the owner of his mind and his effort. Money allows no power to prescribe the value of your effort except the voluntary choice of the man who is willing to trade you his effort in return. Money permits you to obtain for your goods and your labor that which they are worth to the men who buy them, but no more. Money permits no deals except those to mutual benefit by the unforced judgment of the traders. Money demands of you the recognition that men must work for their own benefit, not for their own injury, for their gain, not their loss. The recognition that they are not beasts of burden, born to carry the weight of your misery, that you must offer them values, not wounds, that the common bond among men is not the exchange of suffering, but the exchange of goods. Money demands that you sell not your weakness to men's stupidity, but your talent to their reason. It demands that you buy not the shoddiest they offer, but the best that your money can find. And when men live by trade, with reason, not force, as their final arbiter, it is the best product that wins, the best performance, the man of best judgment and highest ability, and the degree of a man's productiveness is the degree of his reward. This is the code of existence whose tool and symbol is money. Is this what you consider evil?
He says, to repeat, they got everything wrong. He's talking about COVID. So-called experts got everything wrong. Transmission of the disease, wrong. Asymptomatic spread, wrong. PCR testing, wrong. Fatality rate, wrong. Lockdowns, wrong. Community triggers, wrong. Business closures, wrong. School closures, wrong. Quarantining healthy people, wrong. Impact on youth, wrong. Hospital overload, wrong. Plexiglass barriers, wrong. Social distancing, wrong. Outdoor spread, wrong. Masks, wrong. Variant impact, wrong. Natural immunity, wrong. Vaccine efficacy, wrong. Vaccine injury, wrong. And he finishes by saying, did they get a single thing right?
Yes. Justin was right about this tweet.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all there is to it.
The Holocaust happened because people stand by, and tragedies and genocide continue to happen because people stand by. And we're going to ask you to stand by while we pray for...
Brought to you by Zizzy Juice.
He's a man that smokes that job will take you for a ride. Wonders if he's still alive. When you smoke that killing job, it will make you very tall. It seems as if you're going to fall. Knock yourself just about fine. You know I mean that killing job. You think you've blown your top, oh baby, you.
So, our video guy, Ryan, he said to me, that's it? Gotta be more the trends of the news than that.
Everything will seem so funny, darkest days will seem so sunny.
Zizzy Juice.
Yes, the dead will arrive when you smoke that killing.
So I said to myself, he's right. Did you see that video, man? They're at it again in that Ukraine. Whoa! So, whoa! They're fighting out there, man. Whoa! Remember the cat with the ponytail? The pusher? The pusher? He's back there. Whoa! Shoot! He's pushing, man. Cat keeps pushing. Look at these people. They're all pushing. They're not fighters, man. They're guys with a bad attitude. Ain't got no jive.
La da-da-da-da-da. To be sentimental, not sentimental. Everything will seem so funny. Darker days will seem so sunny. Yet the feeling will arrive when you smoke that killing jive. Everything will seem so funny. Darker days will seem so sunny. Yet the feeling will arrive when you're a high man. The set man, you're in the sky, man. Ain't got no red man. You be so mellow, just like a jello, when you smoke that killing jive.
Woo! Cats can't boogie. Ain't no jive alive. Trouble in the Congo. Trouble in the Congo.
But money is only a tool. It will take you wherever you wish, but it will not replace you as the driver. It will give you the means for the satisfaction of your desires, but it will not provide you with desires. Money is the scourge of the men who attempt to reverse the law of causality, the men who seek to replace the mind by seizing the products of the mind. Money will not purchase happiness for the man who has no concept of what he wants. Money will not give him a code of values if he's evaded the knowledge of what to value, and it will not provide him with a purpose if he's evaded the choice of what to seek. Money will not buy intelligence for the fool, or admiration for the coward, or respect for the incompetent. The man who attempts to purchase the brains of his superiors to serve him, with his money replacing his judgment, ends up by becoming the victim of his inferiors. The men of intelligence desert him, but the cheats and the frauds come flocking to him, drawn by a law which he has not discovered, that no man may be smaller than his money. Is this the reason why you call it evil?
This is, what's his name? Hassan. This was his response to this news.
How can you conclude something with low confidence? That's not a conclusion. I think the word you're looking for is guess. By the way, conclusion with low confidence is such a boy move. You know what I mean? Like you're dating someone and they go, babe, what are we? And you're like, Sarah, I can tell you for sure. I don't know. Now, even though they had low confidence, the Department of Energy came out and said COVID was a lab leak. And now every idiot I went to high school with is like, apologize to me right now, Hudson. I told you I was right. And if your hand is bigger than your face, you're gay. Now, to everybody touchdown dancing about this, how long have you been rocking with the Department of Energy? Oh, you've been with them since day one? Hey, what's your second favorite report from the Department of Energy? Now, personally, I love their report on walk-in freezers and coolers, but hey, that's just me, because I'm a real one. But here's the key detail everybody's forgetting while they got the Twitter fingers. The Energy Department is one of 9 intelligence groups that have assessed COVID's origins. 2 have said lab leak, 5 say it came out of natural causes, and 2 say they don't know. And you know what? I personally side with them. I don't know what the is going on. FBI says this, NIC says that. I'm holding out until the DMV chimes in. Okay? All right? Now, here's the thing I'm wondering, okay? Why did this whole lab leak versus wet market thing become the Yankees versus Red Sox of the culture war in the first place? And to me, I think it's because when some people started saying it came from a lab, other people were like, hey, you can't say the Chinese are trying to poison everybody on planet Earth. That's racist. You should say COVID came from a wet market where Chinese people eat weird animals.
All right. So it's, I don't know what to say about this exactly. It's so interesting, just the desperation of still trying to make the people who were claiming that this was a lab leak all along the butt of the joke. Like, yeah, you see, you're still the stupid ones, you see, because, oh, you're all bragging on Twitter about how you were right and we owe you an apology or something like that. But really, you're stupid because, like, what other, how long have you been rocking with the Department of Energy? Or don't you know there's these 5 other intelligence agencies? By the way, I referred to the Department of Energy as an intelligence agency. I don't think that's right, but whatever. But you're so stupid because there's these 5 other agencies that have said they don't believe it's a lab leak or something like that. And it's just, look, as somebody who has dabbled in comedy for the the last 15 years or so. It's just, look, if you're just trying to follow what's funny or what's hilarious here, the obvious butt of the joke would be the people who were denying that this was a lab leak theory. Now, you can come to this joke late in the game, as Jon Stewart kind of did last year when he really did a masterful job, comedically speaking, of pointing out how hilarious it was to deny the likelihood of the fact that there was a coronavirus lab in Wuhan when there was an outbreak of a novel coronavirus in Wuhan. Like there's a lot of funny angles to go with here, but
only the man who does not need it is fit to inherit wealth. The man who would make his own fortune no matter where he started. If an heir is equal to his money, it serves him. If not, it destroys him. But you look on and you cry that money corrupted him. Did it? Or did he corrupt his money? Do not envy a worthless heir. His wealth is not yours, and you would have done no better with it. Do not think that it should have been distributed among you. Loading the world with 50 parasites instead of 1 would not bring back the dead virtue which was the fortune. Money is a living power that dies without its root. Money will not serve the mind that cannot match it. Is this the reason why you call it evil?
And he says, because this is NATO, except he's not in NATO. He's not a NATO member. Just imagine the nerve. And this was in response, by the way, to the fact that the majority of Americans are no longer supporting this. That it is the support for the funding this war in Ukraine is plummeting. And that's what he's saying. Oh, you better support us, or it's your sons and daughters who will fight and die. Look, I'll say first, the unmitigated nerve of this fascist who's in bed with legit Nazis to say that we somehow, to not sit there and say thank you. How about fucking thank you for the unbelievable support, because we would have been crushed if it wasn't for the $100 billion that you guys have already sent us. And oh my God, I'm so sorry, but we're going to have to ask for more. But to say you better send us more or it's your sons and daughters. First off, no, it isn't. No, it motherfucking isn't. And I will tell you this, and I got to be careful. I got to choose my words on this one correctly. I don't want to get too pissed off for no reason. But as someone, he mentions sons and daughters, and I have a son and a daughter. And if you say they're going to fight and die for the cause of Ukraine, fighting against Russia, let's just say, okay, I won't say for risk of messing up for getting kicked off of platforms or something like that. I won't say what I would do to make sure that that doesn't happen. But it would be a lot. Maybe I'll just say what you'd have to do to me to make sure that that does happen. You bet, I don't know. You better bring a SWAT team. You better have at least one man to grab each arm and each leg and drag me away, and then have a fucking cell ready, because it's going to take a lot. And that's, I don't just speak for myself. I think what you don't realize is that there are millions, tens of millions of Americans who you say our sons and daughters will have to fight and die for Ukraine's fight. There's millions of Americans who will fight and die to make sure that ain't the case. So be careful, you pompous fascist asshole. I have no idea what it is. Just to say that so casually, that it's going to be Americans? Why? We're on the other side of the fucking planet from you, dude. We have no obligation to make sure Ukraine is protected so that your corrupt government rules Ukraine rather than Russia's corrupt government, I'm sorry, I don't care. We should cut off all aid and support to Ukraine, and we should have never given it to them to begin with. We should cut it all off immediately.
Money is your means of survival. The verdict you pronounce upon the source of your livelihood is the verdict you pronounce upon your life. If the source is corrupt, you have damned your own existence. Did you get your money by fraud? By pandering to men's vices or men's stupidity? By catering to fools in the hope of getting more than your ability deserves? By lowering your standards? By doing work you despise for purchasers you scorn? If so, then your money will not give you a moment's or a penny's worth of joy. Then all the things you buy will become not a tribute to you, but a reproach, not an achievement, but a reminder of shame. Then you'll scream that money is evil. Evil because it would not pinch hit for your self-respect? Evil because it would not let you enjoy your depravity? Is this the root of your hatred of money?
Through the Capitol as if they were giving a tour. They did that with Jacob Chansley, the so-called QAnon shaman. At one point, they even tried to open locked doors on Chansley's behalf. Chansley was sentenced to 4 years in prison for his crimes in the Capitol on January 6th. And the video we showed you last night raises the obvious question, why? On what grounds? The video I showed you last night also showed that Officer Brian Sicknick was not beaten to death with a fire extinguisher by protesters on January 6th, as the media and Liz Cheney so often claimed. The video shows Sicknick walking around the building, apparently in good health, after he was supposedly killed. We showed you that video. You can make of it what you will. We also showed you a video that proves Ray Epps, the mysterious protester who encouraged others to breach the Capitol, lied to the January 6th committee about where he was on that day. But for some reason, the committee protected him anyway. He was not considered an insurrectionist. He was their ally. So once again, you can draw whatever conclusions you like from that video. We have ours and we shared them with you. But it's really beyond debate that it is good for this country for Americans to be able to see it. The media and politicians, the people in charge, have talked about January 6th every day since it happened for 26 months. And so at some point, the evidence should be presented to the public. In free countries, governments do not lie about protests as a pretext to gain more power for themselves. They don't selectively edit videos for propaganda services and then lie about them in fake hearings and show trials. But that's exactly what happened. And every member of Congress should ask why that happened. But Democrats in the Senate, the Democratic leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, is not asking why. Instead, Chuck Schumer went on the Senate floor today to explode and to say that showing that video, evidence of wrongdoing by the federal government, including the security forces, the police department that Nancy Pelosi personally controlled, letting the public see any of that is a threat to democracy. Watch.
Last night, millions of Americans tuned in to one of the most shameful hours we have ever seen on cable television. Fox News host Tucker Carlson ran a lengthy segment last night arguing the January 6th Capitol attack was not a violent insurrection. I don't think I've ever seen a primetime cable news anchor manipulate his viewers the way Mr. Carlson did last night. I don't think I've ever seen an anchor treat the American people and American democracy with such disdain.
There's nothing that shameful that has ever appeared on American television in the history of the medium. And so, on the basis of that, the self-evident outrage of showing the public video that it paid for and has a right to see, Chuck Schumer called for the censorship of that video. Any information, and he did not dispute that it was accurate, that damages a storyline his party constructed and used must be squelched. And Schumer was explicit on that point. Because that video contradicted lies told by the Democratic Party, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, Chuck Schumer demanded that our bosses pull this show off the air.
He's going to come back tonight with another segment. Fox News should tell him not to. Fox News, Rupert Murdoch, tell Carlson not to run a second segment of lies. I urge Fox News to order Carlson to cease propagating the big lie on his network and to level with their viewers about the truth behind the efforts to mislead the public. Conduct like theirs is just asking for another January 6th to happen.
It's a threat to democracy. Pull him off the air. A couple of obvious observations. You don't often see the Senate Majority Leader openly call for censorship on the floor of the Senate, as if that was totally normal and didn't contradict the spirit and the letter of the First Amendment, but of course it does. But what's really happening here, what you're seeing is hysteria, the overstatement, the crazed hyperbole, the red in the face anger. What is that? Well, it's not outrage. Of course, it's fear. It's panic. Those videos, which we did not retouch, which we brought to you after running everyone by the Capitol Police to make certain that we didn't imperil anybody, we told you that last night. Those videos touch a nerve because they're a threat to the lies that Chuck Schumer has been telling for the last 26 months, and not just Chuck Schumer. We should also tell you that Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, was joined in this outrage by the Senate Minority Leader, and that would be a Republican, Mitch McConnell. And they were joined by a cascade of other Republicans, Tom Tillis from North Carolina, Mitt Romney from Utah, all sharing the same outrage. And from this, we learn two things. One, you're getting close to what they really care about. And you have to ask yourself, why degrade themselves by telling such obvious lies and calling for censorship? Why? What are they trying to protect? That might be worth exploring, and we plan to. And the second thing that we learned from this is that they're on the same side. The Senate Majority Leader joins the Senate Minority Leader. Tom Tillis, Mitt Romney. They're all on the same side. So it's actually not about left and right. It's not about Republican and Democrat. Here you have people with shared interests. The open borders people. The people like Mitch McConnell who are living in splendor on Chinese money. The people who underneath it all have everything in common, are all aligned against everyone else. And that would include almost all news organizations in this country as well. And so if you're watching this at home, it might be kind of interesting to keep a list. Because one thing we learned today is that they're all in agreement with each other. They kind of outed themselves. They sort of showed their membership cards in whatever club this is to the public. So keep a list. If you want to know who's actually aligned, despite the illusion of partisanship, we found out today. We have a little more tape for you tonight. So if you take 3 steps back, you may notice that the one person, really, who was never blamed for anything that happened on January 6th was the very same person who was in charge of the police force, the Capitol Hill Police, that was charged with securing safety on January 6th. And that person was Nancy Pelosi. So if there was a security failure on January 6th, and demonstrably there was, that was probably Nancy Pelosi's fault. And after looking at thousands of hours of footage, we came to the conclusion that many others have reached, which is the Capitol Police were not prepared for what happened. And that's fascinating when you think about it, because there was ample warning. The federal intel and law enforcement agencies knew perfectly well there could be a massive disturbance at the Capitol. But the frontline officers on duty that day didn't know. And yet the people who kept that information from the frontline officers who were overwhelmed by thousands of people milling around the Capitol building, the people who fell down on the job, who didn't do their job, they were not punished. They were rewarded. And you have to ask yourself, why is that?
Money will always remain an effect and refuse to replace you as the cause. Money is the product of virtue, but it will not give you virtue, and it will not redeem your vices. Money will not give you the unearned, neither in matter nor in spirit. Is this the root of your hatred of money?
Let's play another clip just to give you a little taste. Pick whichever one, Brian. Let's see. There's a whole bunch of them.
Speaker Kevin McCarthy's decision to selectively provide access to more than 40,000 hours of January 6th security footage. I mean, it was bad enough when he announced that Tucker Carlson, the chief propagandist at Fox, would get it exclusively. I mean, we know what he'll do with it, cherry-pick video to lie to his viewers about January 6th, something he's been doing for 2 years. But now, McCarthy has agreed to provide the highly sensitive videos to the actual people who attacked the Capitol in the first place. Some of the same people who were calling for the hanging of former Vice President Mike Pence.
This is the most disgustingly tragic thing I've ever heard, that people are being prosecuted by the United States government, and there's evidence that I guess you're saying could possibly exonerate them, and the government's been withholding that evidence, and you're saying that the government should continue to withhold that evidence because otherwise wrongfully accused people won't be going to jail.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And with a smile, with your bright shirt, your childish hair dye,
and look at just like the outrageous level, the nerve of this woman to call Tucker Carlson a propagandist. Whereas, like, look at what she's doing. Like, she's not arguing in any way why these tapes shouldn't be sent, what's dangerous about what's. She's just slandering everybody involved. Oh, the chief propagandist who's nothing but a liar, Tucker Carlson, and then they're going to send it to the actual people on January 6th. Just bring it back a little bit and just look at the way it's just nothing but insults of all the people, and pretty unfounded ones. But here, let's literally listen to what she's saying here.
Actual people who attacked the Capitol in the first place. Some of the same people who were calling for the hanging of former Vice President Mike Pence and vowing to drag former Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Congresswomen like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez out of the Capitol by their hair. Some of the same people who are associated with extremist groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. How can McCarthy justify giving some of the same people that the FBI director called the most dangerous faction of the country access to information about the security routes of lawmakers, where their safe rooms are, as well as where security cameras are located? I mean, is he deliberately trying to give these people crucial information that they would need to plan another attack and perhaps be more successful? Because if he's not doing that, he sure is doing a great impression of someone who is.
Right. So there you go. So she's just, and then at this point, it's just, he's giving the tapes to the same people who were screaming, they wanted to kill the vice president and drag Nancy Pelosi and AOC out of there by their hair. And they were the same people who were mixed up with Proud Boys and all this. Like, do you have any evidence of that? Do you have any evidence that the people he's giving this to were saying that? Like, okay, if you have evidence of that, fine. But she doesn't. She's just, no. She's just, oh, yeah. Well, the other people in the group were saying that. You're talking about people who, in many cases, simply entered a government building where, I mean, I don't know, we've seen video of where cops were moving barricades aside, in some cases waving them in. That's the crime here. Now, I'm not saying you can make an argument about people like, look, I don't have a lot of sympathy for like government property. Okay. But you could make an argument there were people there who were smashing windows, people there who were making threats. Okay. But there's no question that there's a lot of people whose crime was simply entering a government building when police allowed them to. And they're looking at their life being ruined over that. And it's just like, if we talk about them, we're just going to lump them in with all the rest. Like, Jesus Christ, dude. Jesus Christ. I mean, especially, in the, I guess this was early 2021, but in the previous year, the previous summer, just 6 months earlier, there were these massive riots all over the country. Now, I'm absolutely fine with prosecuting anybody in the Black Lives Matter riots who like viciously assaulted somebody or, like destroyed someone's business or looting or something like that, right? Now, of course, there's no political will to do that. But I'd be fine with prosecuting them. But imagine like ruining the life of someone who just attended one of the rallies or one of the protests or one of the riots, just was there. You'd be like, I don't know, man, that seems a little bit harsh. But, imagine what Joy Reid would say if you were talking about doing that. Anyway, it's just they're all freaking out. And like, I'm sorry, don't give me this bullshit that like what you're freaking out about is, it was like, and this is who the FBI director called the most dangerous people in America. It's like, yeah, well, Ray is a fucking liar and a fraud. And this is just a ridiculous idea. They're the most dangerous people in America. Really? And this fantasy that they're going to see the the congressman's escape route, and then this will make it easier for them to plan their next January 6th. This is all, come on. This is just ridiculous. This is just ridiculous. That what they're concerned with is that this might really fuck up their narrative and really make them all look like a bunch of liars, like they are. That's the concern here. Anyway, interested to see if there's anything there. I don't.
Or did you say it's the love of money that's the root of all evil? To love a thing is to know and love its nature. To love money is to know and love the fact that money is the creation of the best power within you, and your passkey to trade your effort for the effort of the best among men. It's the person who would sell his soul for a nickel who is loudest in proclaiming his hatred of money, and he has good reason to hate it. The lovers of money are willing to work for it. They know they are able to deserve it. Let me give you a tip on a clue to men's characters. The man who damns money has obtained it dishonorably. The man who respects it has earned it. Run for your life from any man who tells you that money is evil. That sentence is the leper's bell of an approaching looter. So long as men live together on earth, a need means to deal with one another. Their only substitute, if they abandon money, is the muzzle of a gun. But money demands of you the highest virtues, if you wish to make it or to keep it. Men who have no courage, pride, or self-esteem, men who have no moral sense of their right to the money and are not willing to defend it as they defend their life, men who apologize for being rich, will not remain rich for long. They are the natural bait for the swarms of looters that stay under rocks for centuries, but come crawling out at the first smell of a man who begs to be forgiven for the guilt of owning wealth. They will hasten to relieve him of the guilt and of his life, as he deserves. Then you will see the rise of the men of the double standard, the men who live by force, yet count on those who live by trade to create the value of their looted money, the men who are the hitchhikers of virtue. In a moral society, these are the criminals, and the statutes are written to protect you against them. But when a society establishes criminals by right and looters by law, men who use force to seize the wealth of disarmed victims, then money becomes its creator's avenger. Such looters believe it safe to rob defenseless men once they've passed a law to disarm them. But their loot becomes the magnet for other looters, who get it from them as they got it. Then the race goes, not to the ablest at production, but to those most ruthless at brutality. When force is the standard, the murderer wins over the pickpocket. And then that society vanishes in a spread of ruins and slaughter. Do you wish to know whether that day is coming? Watch money. Money is the barometer of a society's virtue. When you see that trading is done not by consent but by compulsion, when you see that in order to produce you need to obtain permission from men who produce nothing, when you see that money is flowing to those who deal not in goods but in favors, when you see that men get richer by graft and by pull than by work, and your laws don't protect you against them, but protect them against you, when you see corruption being rewarded and honesty becoming a self-sacrifice, you may know that your society is doomed.
Okay, what does banning all guns look like? What will it take to ban all guns? Do you think you're going to disarm Texas? Like, what do you think that's going to look like? Just writing something down on a piece of paper? No, I think it's probably going to look like going door to door with a militarized police force, having shooting confrontations left. My point is, it's probably going to look more like a civil war than anything else. So it's just like, you know, there's so much more to it than to just say, oh, Jon Stewart goes, because you don't fucking care. That's what Jon Stewart says to him. You don't care about those kids dying. It's like, Jesus, man. So if you don't want to ban cars, you don't care about the kids who die from car crashes, right? And it's just like a really shitty way to argue. But of course, this is like the thing, because he can't even sit there. No one can sit there and actually defend why drag queens reading books to kids should be a thing, why transgender shows for children should be a thing, why any of this stuff, why drag your kid to trans week, why should any of this be a thing? This is so insane. Like, what do you do? Give me the defense of why this is something we should be doing to our kids. This is bonkers. And to sit there and go, look, this ideology is being pushed on children across the country. Now, okay, it's true that like the numbers of children who have sex, like reassignment surgery, is not very high. There's not a ton of kids who are having that. The number of children who are given puberty blockers is higher than that, but still not insane. But children are being indoctrinated with this ideology all throughout the country. And it's led to like this crazy increase in the number of kids who are identifying as trans. These are not kids who just like the kids who have gender dysmorphia. These are like, it's a whole new thing where they've created a fad out of this and it's being pushed constantly. And so when you see someone standing up being like, this should be illegal to do this.
Money is so noble a medium that it does not compete with guns, and it does not make terms with brutality. It will not permit a country to survive as half property, half loot. Whenever destroyers appear among men, they start by destroying money, for money is men's protection and the base of a moral existence.
They started getting into the difference between equality and equity. Let's take a look at that and give our thoughts.
Using equality of opportunity with trying to guarantee equity and outcomes. Okay, that's interesting because I think this word equity has come into the language in the last few years, and before that we didn't hear it a lot. And I think a lot of people hear equity and they hear equality. It's the same word, and it's not the same word in the same concept. So how would you differentiate between equity and equality?
Well, equality, we talk about, I don't know what the answer to that is. Come me to think of it, equality is equality of opportunity. All right? We live in a society, we want all people to have whatever color your skin is.
Equity, I think, is more guarantee of outcome, is it not?
I think so.
Okay, so which side do you come down on?
Equality.
Equality.
Yeah.
Okay. Boys, any comment on that one?
Go ahead, Rob. Any thoughts you have on this?
All right, I wouldn't want to have to sit down and define equality versus equity because that's not the world I live in. That's not the way I approach things. I approach things from a freedom and value perspective. But if you're Bernie Sanders, this is your entire thing. I don't think you can just say, well, I guess. I think equality is the one. I think I like that one. Let me check with the guy who wrote the book for me. Maybe he can tell me which is the one that I'm supposed to stand for. How are you lost on this?
He didn't have an answer. How did he not have an answer for this?
This is your whole thing, dude.
Basic question. So it's literally like asking a libertarian. It's like, so you have a non-aggression principle, and you go, I don't know. I mean, I guess. First off, equality and equity, at least the way these terms are being used, the words don't actually mean different things. They don't. Like, equality means the same. And so when you say we should have equality, that's suggesting that everyone should have the same. That is suggesting equity in the same sense. But whatever, typically the way they sparse this out is that, no, you're saying equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome. How could you truly make everyone's opportunity equal? This would be like, what does that even mean? And then someone like Bernie Sanders can say, no, I'm just for equality. I'm just for equality of opportunity, And then he can logically from there, I think with somewhat strong footing, say, and that's why everyone should have the same education and the same healthcare and the same housing and the same all of this. So we all start out with the same opportunity, And then like, what? Oh, okay. So now the conservatives who say, I'm just for equality of opportunity, you've given away the whole game. Someone who's worked really hard their whole lives so they can give their kids a great life. Now their kids are going to have a better opportunity than someone else's kids. So now we got to equalize out for that, right? I mean, if they're all going to have the equal outcome, then obviously we'd have to take from that family and give to some other family who didn't work really hard and their kids don't have the same opportunities they have. So you get right back into the same point. No one's ever going to have equal opportunity. Now, the whole notion of equal outcomes or equity, that everyone ends up exactly the same, right? We all see the problems with that, and they're all over the place. That, I think it was Thomas Sowell.
But if you're Bernie Sanders, wouldn't you prefer equity? I mean,
you'd think
you would. Yeah, I mean, if you're talking in ideals, why wouldn't you want everyone to end up at the exact same place?
Right.
I mean, we're talking about magical wands of things that can't happen anyways. So why not go for equity?
My point is more or less that they're the same thing, and that one leads to the other. I mean, if you think about it like this, like, we have a finite lifespan, and then there's another generation that comes out with a finite lifespan than them. So if you're talking about starting at an equal point, well, if you end up at a non-equal point, then the next generation starts at a non-equal point. So we're going to have to equalize it again, right? We might as well just keep like making things the same, and so you end up at the same ending point. And this is where you get to all of these things, like whatever, any example of this, whether if there's a disproportionate outcome for different racial groups or something like that, we go, oh, look, this is racism because all of the racial groups didn't end up at the same point. And then if they don't end up at the same point, then the next generation obviously is not going to have an equal opportunity to go do whatever they want to do in life. But all of this is nonsense. It was, I believe it's Thomas Sowell who pointed out that even if you had pure equality, if every human being was in the exact same position, the same amount of wealth, the same amount of resources, the same living conditions, the same education levels, the same everything, one day later, you'd have inequality, right? Because they'd make different decisions and different things. They'd have different abilities. There's just no way, there's no way to actually maintain this elusive idea of sameness. There's this great book that Murray Rothbard wrote called Egalitarianism, A Revolt Against Nature. And the point that he was making was that it's the whole process of nature is things not being the same, not being equal, but being different. And that in order to kind of force everything back to being the same, you actually have to be fighting against the very nature of what we are. It's just insane that Bernie Sanders has no answer, hasn't thought about this at all, hasn't even considered these possibilities. Really is unbelievable that Bernie Sanders is able to play this game where he just kind of goes, no, I don't know. I don't really even know. I don't know what the differences are.
It seems like an incredibly that's like the foundational question for your entire worldview. How do you not have an answer for that? It would be also interesting just to flip it to, what do you think is the ideal level of wealth redistribution, and how do you think it should actually work in practice? What are the government agencies? How do they facilitate it? Why do you think they work better than the market? Just give me in practical terms, what amount of money do you think should be taken away from people that have it, and how do you think it should actually be redistributed? And I bet he wouldn't even have an answer for that.
Yeah. No, he would dodge and just go, well, look, what I think is that healthcare is a human right. And people should have healthcare, and just
right. So where does the money come from, and how are you getting it to the people that need the healthcare? Just give it to me in simple terms, Mr. Sanders. The billionaires should not be able to have the billions. Why do they need the billions? All right, fine. So how much are we taking from them, and how does that help the people that you say need it?
Yeah. No, but it's you realize the guy has no interest in actual thoughtful interaction in this stuff. He's just well, let me move to my next platitude. And that's why he doesn't like the question. You can already see he doesn't like the question. He's like, dude, just set me up for a platitude. I'm not trying to answer these philosophical questions. So,
well, anyway. Isn't it incredible that strategy's worked? I mean, in terms of, I guess this is your brilliant representative of socialism, a guy who can't even answer a foundational question.
Yeah, he's your guy. He's your guy. The guy who completely supports, by the way, the war in Ukraine. This is your real left-wing hero who caves and endorses Hillary Clinton, caves and endorses Joe Biden, pulls back the Yemen resolution, the war powers resolution, and whatever. All right, guys, let's take a moment and thank our sponsor for today's show, which is sheathunderwear.com, the underwear of legends.
And let me just read to you what Wesley Mitchell wrote about Smith and the Wealth of Nations. He said, Adam Smith came to the conclusion, quote, that the wealth of nations will increase most rapidly if every person is allowed the fullest opportunity to decide for his own individual self what is the best way to use his labor and whatever capital he possesses. In other words, the best policy for governments is to interfere as little as possible with the occupations and investments of its citizens. You see how bold and sweeping that argument is from Adam Smith's eyes. Everybody, quite obviously, is pursuing his own interests. It is evident in his own local situation that he is a better judge of where his economic interest lies than any statesman could be. Therefore, the individual will get on best if he is left alone by the government. This is the great argument for laissez-faire. The beauty of this Adam Smith model that he had created. Now, granted, this was an imperfect model. It had all kinds of problems with distribution and marginal theory and so forth. And it took the French laissez-faire school, the Austrian school, the Chicago school. There are a number of economists who improved upon the model that Adam Smith built. No question about that. I mean, Carl Menger talks about how he was in a frenzy. He thought, I have discovered how to keep the Adam Smith model going and not tear it down and have to rebuild the whole structure, which is what the Marxists and the Keynesians and institutionalists and the socialists, that's what they have done. They want to just tear down the Adam Smith model and build their own model. So there's a lot to be said here for this Mitchell contribution. It was a real eye-opener for me when I saw this, and I have to thank Lanny Evenstein from UC Santa Barbara, who told me about the lecture notes of Wesley Mitchell, which, by the way, are public and which I'm going to be putting on my website, mskousen.com, so that people can go and directly read this without having to buy the book.
Hey, everybody, quick sponsor message. How about being the most impressive person in the room? Not a know-it-all. That's different. A charming, knowledgeable person people wonder about. How did that person get to be so interesting and know so much about so many things and be able to participate in and hold conversations on such a wide array of topics? Well, the answer is the Blinkist app. Blinkist takes thousands and thousands of nonfiction titles over dozens of subject areas and breaks them down into 15-minute chunks. Right now, Blinkist has a special offer just for our audience. Go to Blinkist.com/woods to start your 7-day free trial and get 25% off a Blinkist premium membership. That's Blinkist, spelled Blinkist, Blinkist.com/woods to get 25% off and a 7-day free trial. Blinkist.com/woods. And now for a limited time, you can even use Blinkist Connect to share your premium account. You'll get 2 premium subscriptions for the price of 1.
Into Teotihuacan. Something really interesting happened to me there. This guy, whose nickname was Gorilla, giving us this wonderful tour. And he goes, wait, right here. And we're in this giant square. And he runs down this dirt mound about 150 feet away. And he goes, can you hear me? And it was like, oh my God. I could hear him. He goes, this square was built with these mounds here to be able to speak at this voice to 250,000 people.
Whoa.
And I was like, what?
Did it make sense, the acoustics, like the way it's set up?
Because I play music, I thought, okay, that means these acoustics are so perfect. Like, how do you discover that?
One point of view we're going to put out there, and anyone who doesn't agree with it is going to be sidelined, said Redfield. And as I say, I was only the CDC director, and I was sidelined. So here we have going against your principles, the scientific principles. And in fact, we have about 1 minute and 8 seconds that I've taken from the hearing where Redfield talks about how Fauci sidelined him for coming to the, quote, wrong conclusions about the origin of this virus. If we can play that first, I think, 1 minute and 8 seconds of that second clip that we have, I think that says pretty much everything we need to say.
Here we go. 3 years ago, if you thought it came from a lab, if you raised that, you were called a nut job, you got censored on Twitter, you were blacklisted on Twitter, you were even called a crackpot by the very scientist who in late January sent emails to Dr. Fauci and said it came from a lab. They called you crackpot. Is that right, Dr. Redfield?
I think the most upsetting thing to me was the Baltimore Sun calling me a racist because I said this came from a Wuhan lab.
Dr. Redfield, you ran the CDC and you were on the coronavirus task force, is that right?
Correct.
That was formed on January 29th, 2020, is that right?
Correct.
2 days later, Dr. Fauci gets an email from Dr. Anderson which says what? Virus looks engineered, virus not consistent with evolutionary theory. Is that accurate?
That's my understanding.
Next day, I know. Did he share that email with you, by the way, Dr. Redfield?
No.
As a member of the task force, as the head of CDC, did he share that email with you?
No.
Okay, next day, February 1st, Dr. Gary sends Dr. Fauci another email. That email says, I don't know how this happens in nature, but it would be easy to do in a lab. Did he share that email with you, Dr. Redfield?
No.
Did he share that email? No. So he's frozen out because he had the wrong opinions based on his scientific background about that. I think we're getting closer to the truth on this, Dr. Paul. The only danger is you're going to find a lot of people that are going to get bogged down into the quagmire of those evil Chinese did it. In fact, there's someone else that was evil behind this, and it was not the Chinese government in this particular instance.
Well, he didn't point it out, but this was the episode that prompted the two people that were excluded, and then they got converted, and they came back and voted with Fauci.
Yep.
And guess what? Their career was boosted with more money to spend at their will. So there was money involved, and that is the reason why medicine should not be partners with the government. We don't want. We understood 1,000 years ago that you shouldn't take religious, spiritual beliefs and combine them with the government, because the government dominates, what the message should be. But that is true in anything that we do. Once you turn that over, if it's economics, then you get a deep state and they run it and you have corporatism. But in this case, if you do it with medicine, they become dominant and they get mixed up in profiteering and political power. And that is what's been going on especially gotten so much worse in these last 3 years. It has to be reversed, and it won't be reversed until we get even more of this. So that's why this committee work is so crucial.
Yeah, I hope Fauci's sweating. Well, we've been going on long on these two big stories, I think, but we do need to have a little quick update on a vote yesterday. If we can put this next one on. Now, the House voted on the Matt Gaetz resolution. It was a resolution based on the War Powers Resolution to withdraw troops from Syria. Now, that resolution did not pass. It was a vote of, as you can see here on the board, 103 yes, 103 voted to get out of Syria, pull those 900 troops out, and 321 voted against it. And I think if you hadn't had a lot of experience in these kinds of resolutions, there's a risk of being downtrodden. But however, you've had a lot of experience in this exact thing. You and Dennis Kucinich did this, and you have a different take on these numbers here.
Yes, I think they're pretty darn good. What do you compare it to? Our votes, when we tried to get people to wise up about the Middle Eastern war. Now, if we took a vote today on what we should have done, I think we'd be in a lot better shape about the Middle East, because, it took them 10 and 20 years to wise up and get out, and they still debate the big issue. How do you leave? And of course, my answer about how do you get out of Afghanistan and places like that? Don't go in the first place, So that I think it's my comment that I wrote down when I was looking at it, not too bad.
Not too bad.
Because and as you refresh our memory about the resolutions we did quite a few, and we had several Democrats would come over and vote with us. But I think it's pretty good. But I think this is the reflection that there's more public support for this position than there was when we started this. And I think the momentum is there, and I think it's going to continue. And that's why I cautiously now consider the fact that maybe World War III, of the old-fashioned World War II type, we will not break out tomorrow because for two reasons. One, we're broke and the people are sick and tired of it, and they're getting poorer, and maybe we don't have the stomach for it, and maybe that's all wishful thinking, but it's a possibility.
Absolutely. The one significant event around this, I think, is that the progressive known as the Squad, they joined Matt Gaetz. They went across the aisle. I'm sure they don't have a lot in common with Matt Gaetz. They not only came across the aisle, they also released a letter urging a yes vote on this. So we might be seeing, I hate to be too optimistic, the beginning of a kind of right-left coalition against these wars that we saw a lot back when you were in Congress, and that would be a very welcome thing.
Destroyers seize gold and leave to its owners a counterfeit pile of paper. This kills all objective standards and delivers men into the arbitrary power of an arbitrary setter of values. Gold was an objective value, an equivalent of wealth produced. Paper is a mortgage on wealth that does not exist, backed by a gun aimed at those who are expected to produce it. Paper is a check drawn by legal looters upon an account which is not theirs, upon the virtue of the victims. Watch for the day when it bounces, marked account overdrawn.
Advice to people: if you're going to be in this space and talking about these things, at least say the thing that fucking matters. And you see this week as it comes out that, like, oh yeah, the lab leak theory is correct. Oh yeah, it wasn't Russia who blew up Nord Stream. Oh yeah, January 6th wasn't at all what it was described to be. Just with all these things, you're like, oh yeah, that looks pretty good for all the people who were willing to say that when it mattered. And it looks really bad for all the people who weren't. Now, I know that there's people out there who just put their head in the sand and just buy into the propaganda. But you know what? They're a non-factor. And in the sense that we're not playing for them. We're playing for the rest of us. We're playing a different game. So within this game, right, you want to try to play to those people who will listen. And I'll tell you, just from my experience, from Rob's experience, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of them who are out there and are willing to listen to this shit if you actually tell the truth and get it right with some consistency.
When you have made evil the means of survival, do not expect men to remain good. Do not expect them to stay moral and lose their lives for the purpose of becoming the fodder of the immoral. Do not expect them to produce when production is punished and looting rewarded. Do not ask who is destroying the world. You are.
I've known Cy for over 40 years, and I've always found him to be very thorough, to go on one person telling a story. And the story he lays out in his recent Substack publication on the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline was very clearly that this was an operation that was planned outside of the normal requirement. It was not done by the CIA. The CIA elements played a role in it because it was carried out under the auspices of a classified military unit. Therefore, they were able to get it by without briefing the Congress. Now, one of the important facts that Cy talks about, this diving unit that was based in Panama City, Florida. Well, that just happens to be the location of the CIA's maritime branch and the Directorate of Operations. So, gee, just a coincidence, I guess. One of the critical things that Cy gets into is that going down 200 feet in the Baltic Sea, it's extremely cold water, so you can't just slap on snorkel gear or scuba gear and go down. Frankly, if you were scuba diving, you could only go to about 120 feet. So to descend to that full 200 feet below the surface of that sea requires a dry suit, requires some extensive equipment that will keep the pressure such that the diver is not, isn't suffering hypoxia or getting the bends. So, and then you're carrying a lot of weight. So up to upwards of 1,000 pounds of explosives. Just because you're in water doesn't mean it suddenly gets lighter. So
when CIA officers are asked to do things that are marginally immoral and marginally criminal, do they push back? Do they debate? Or do they respond as if they were Army privates told to assault a hill against enemy fire?
It depends upon the individual officer. I know, for example, during the wars in Central America in the 1986 to 89 period, the chief of station in Costa Rica was asked by Claire George, who was in charge of the Directorate of Operations at that time, to do something that was basically illegal. And that officer went ahead, did it, and ended up being prosecuted. Whereas the CIA chief of station in El Salvador, Jack McCavin, Jack was asked to do the same thing. He said, fine, put it in writing. Well, they wouldn't put it in writing, and he wouldn't do it, and he didn't get indicted. So yeah, there's some people in the management chain that will play fast and loose with the facts. And I bet your buddy Jack Devine will know about that situation with Jack McCavin, and as well as the chief of station down in Costa Rica, because the individual in Costa Rica was really ill-served and unfairly treated.
Jack Devine, of course, comes on the show on a regular basis and always mouths the CIA line, the company line, the government line. I'm happy and thrilled to have you and Ray McGovern and Phil Giraldi, people notoriously known for intellectual honesty, no matter what their bosses want them to do.
You stand the greatest productive civilization, and you wonder why it's crumbling around you, while you're damning its lifeblood. Money. You look upon money as the savages did before you, and you wonder why the jungle is creeping back to the edge of your cities.
Is Ukrainian intel trustworthy and professional, or just political?
The Ukrainian intel is political, completely political. I think the U.S. ability to recruit Russian assets is history. The Russians, there was a period where America was really Ronald Reagan's city on a hill, a light through the world, seen as a beacon of freedom, seen as some place that where truth was valued, where justice was meted out equitably. But the Russians are looking at the United States, and we're looking like the old Soviet Union. We're locking up people that are political opponents. The judicial system is corrupt. We've got a media that's acting like the worst of Pravda in the old Soviet days, where they try to drown out anybody that dare speak a truth that doesn't go along with the popular narrative. So the incentive to recruit Russians is it's very difficult. If anything, I think the Russians are having a field day recruiting U.S. intelligence assets.
Wow. Why do you think that the media, which of course was fiercely against the Vietnam War in that era, and we're talking 50 or 60 years ago, why do you think the media today is either cowed by or in bed with the government? Does the CIA pass on to the media versions of events that the White House or Langley wants out there, whether those versions are connected to the truth or not?
The real problem is that the concentration, the corporate concentration and control over the media there was an era 40 years ago where there was competition, and there was actually a strong incentive for the Washington Post to try to beat out the New York Times. But now with the vast corporate control over them, there's little incentive for these different media entities to put something that could potentially anger the government, because the government in its regulatory capacity can hurt them not just through the FCC, but also through through the SEC, because these are corporate entities and they have potential vulnerabilities. Plus, those corporations are pouring lots of money into these political parties in order to have influence. So there's really no incentive in the system right now to tell the truth.
Throughout men's history, money was always seized by looters of one brand or another, whose names changed, but whose method remained the same: to seize wealth by force, and to keep the producers bound, demeaned, defamed, deprived of honor. That phrase about the evil of money, which you mouth with such righteous recklessness, comes from a time when wealth was produced by the labor of slaves. Slaves who repeated the motions once discovered by somebody's mind and left unimproved for centuries. So long as production was ruled by force and wealth was obtained by conquest, there was little to conquer. Yet through all the centuries of stagnation and starvation, men exalted the looters as aristocrats of the sword, as aristocrats of birth, as aristocrats of the bureau, and despised the producers as slaves, as traders, as shopkeepers, as industrialists. To the glory of mankind there was, for the first and only time in history, a country of money. And I have no higher, more reverent tribute to pay to America, for this means a country of reason, justice, freedom, production, achievement. For the first time, man's mind and money were set free, and there were no fortunes by conquest, but only fortunes by work. And instead of swordsmen and slaves, there appeared the real maker of wealth, the greatest worker, the highest type of human being, the self-made man, the American industrialist. If you ask me to name the proudest distinction of Americans, I would choose, because it contains all the others, the fact that they were the people who created the phrase, to make money. No other language or nation had ever used these words before. Men had always thought of wealth as a static quantity, to be seized, begged, inherited, shared, looted, or obtained as a favor. Americans were the first to understand that wealth has to be created. The words, to make money, hold the essence of human morality. Yet these were the words for which Americans were denounced by the rotted cultures of the looters' continents. Now the looters' credo has brought you to regard your proudest achievements as a hallmark of shame, your prosperity as guilt, your greatest men, the industrialists, as blackguards, and your magnificent factories as the product and property of muscular labor, the labor of whip-driven slaves, like the pyramids of Egypt. The rotter who simpers that he sees no difference between the power of the dollar and the power of the whip ought to learn the difference on his own hide, as I think he will. Until and unless you discover that money is the root of all good, you ask for your own destruction. When money ceases to be the tool by which men deal with one another, then men become the tools of men. Blood, whips, and guns for dollars. Take your choice. There is no other, and your time is running out.